Earth had always been a forgotten speck in the grand design of the universe. Nestled within a remote corner of the galaxy, its people lived obliviously to the vast web of interstellar politics and ancient powers that shaped the cosmos. To the higher echelons of the galactic empire, Earth was little more than a primitive curiosity, a planet too insignificant to warrant attention. But that perception was about to change, for something had stirred within humanity, something that could pose a threat to the Empire's centuries-long reign. In the Empire's towering citadels, where stars twinkled like jewels against the black velvet of space, the decision was made. Earth had been marked for elimination. Its people, unwitting in their ignorance, were no match for the machinations of the Empire. The assassins, the Empire's most elite operatives, were dispatched with ruthless precision, their mission simple: annihilate the seed of potential before it could blossom into a threat. Among the assassins was Thrax, a lithe figure with piercing eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light of his ship's cockpit. His kind, the Zeller, were masters of stealth, capable of blending into the shadows as easily as slipping through the cracks of a collapsing universe. They were a species bred for this very purpose, the silent death that moved without a trace. Thrax's people had long been the Empire's most reliable weapon, dispatched to worlds where dissent was thought to fester or where whispers of revolution grew too loud. Earth, despite its seeming insignificance, had drawn the attention of the Empire's seers. A prophecy had whispered of a human force that could one day challenge the galactic order. The assassins had been sent to quell that possibility. But Thrax's assignment was unique. He had studied Earth from afar, its history, its people, their wars, and their peace. Their resilience intrigued him, though he would never admit it to anyone, especially not his cold, calculating superiors. His mission was to eliminate the key players, the ones whose actions could catalyze the awakening of Earth's dormant potential. Scientists, military leaders, diplomats. Each target was carefully selected for their role in the looming future. They were the threads that, if left intact, could weave a pattern that threatened the Empire. And Thrax, ever the perfectionist, would make sure no thread remained. The ship's automated systems hummed as he neared Earth's atmosphere. The planet appeared before him, a swirling ball of blue and green with swirling clouds, a peaceful and idyllic world from space. But beneath its surface lay the simmering potential for violence, unrest, and revolution. Thrax felt no sentiment, no connection to the world below. This was simply another mission, one to be completed with the same methodical precision as all others. But even he couldn't entirely suppress a flicker of unease. The human capacity for destruction was unquantifiable. As he descended into the atmosphere, his ship's cloaking technology activated. No one would see him. No one would know he was here until it was far too late. The first target was in Washington, D.C., a scientist known for her controversial work on quantum mechanics. The Empire had deemed her discoveries a risk to their control of time and space, and as such, she had become a priority for elimination. Thrax landed silently in the outskirts of the city, cloaking his ship in the dense fog that rolled over the land during the early hours of the morning. He stepped out, his boots making no sound on the wet ground. The city ahead of him seemed to sleep, unaware of the fate that awaited it. He moved with purpose, his mind already calculating the most efficient path to his target's location. As a species that thrived in the darkness, he was never in a hurry. There was no need. Time for him was an ally. He arrived at the scientist's residence just before dawn. The building was modest, tucked away on a quiet street, far from the government's watchful eye. A faint light glowed from a window on the second floor. The scientist was still awake, laboring over equations that could very well alter the course of history. Thrax could sense the hum of her thoughts, the restless energy she exuded as she worked into the night. He moved swiftly, slipping through the shadows, bypassing security systems with ease. The human world was no match for the Zeller's skills. He reached the door to her office and paused, allowing the silence to envelop him. There was no fear in him, only the cold certainty of his purpose. He would end her research, her life, and by extension, any hope of humanity ever surpassing the Empire's grasp. As his hand reached for the doorknob, a voice rang out from within, low and unshakable. "I know you're there." Thrax froze. The human had sensed him. Impossible. The scientist's keen intuition had detected his presence, and for the briefest moment, the assassin was caught off guard. No human had ever been able to perceive his movements before. His mind raced. Had she been warned? Was there something more to this world than he understood? Before he could analyze the situation further, the door flew open, and the scientist stood before him, unarmed but unafraid. Her eyes locked with his, a knowing look that suggested she understood what he was before he even made a move. "You've come to kill me," she said, her voice steady despite the peril she was in. "But you won't. Not today." Thrax's heart, if he had won, would have skipped a beat. This was not how the mission was supposed to unfold. This was supposed to be easy, swift, and without resistance. He had underestimated her, and in that moment of hesitation, the first seeds of doubt were planted. "Who are you?" Thrax demanded, his voice cold and lethal. The scientist smiled faintly. "I'm the one who's going to stop you. And your empire." With that, she stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. The room inside was filled with diagrams, equations, and holographic projections of vast potential. There was more to Earth than he had been told. This wasn't just a planet of primitive humans. It was a nest of dangerous ideas. Ideas that could challenge the galaxy's balance. Thrax hesitated for only a second longer before stepping into the room. The game had changed, and he, the perfect predator, was beginning to realize that he was not the only one playing. The first assassination was clean. Too clean. A shot through the skull, a life snuffed out before anyone could even fathom the danger that had arrived on Earth. The victim, General Mark Fisher, had been one of the brightest minds in humanity's defense system, a man responsible for the oversight of military operations across the globe. He'd been a target for a reason, a person who held too much power, and one whose potential influence could spur a new global uprising. The assassin, like all the others, moved without hesitation, leaving no trace of their presence behind. By the time the news broke, the world was still waking from its slumber. Fisher's body was discovered in his office, a lone bullet wound between the eyes, the chair slightly turned as if he had been taken off guard mid-thought. His personal security system hadn't detected anything. His guards on duty just outside the door hadn't seen a thing. The authorities were baffled. There was no evidence. No fingerprints, no trace of foreign DNA, no signs of a struggle. The only thing that remained was the cold finality of his death and the cryptic nature of it. But to Thrax, the work was elementary, perfect in its simplicity. He'd left behind no room for error. The next two targets were just as easy. Dr. Evelyn Carter, a biochemist working on genetic engineering that could revolutionize Earth's food production, was found dead in her laboratory, her throat slashed with surgical precision. Like Fisher, she was a key figure, one whose research had the potential to disrupt the delicate balance the Empire had maintained for centuries. And then there was David Grant, the head of a global cybersecurity firm. His murder was slightly more elaborate, involving hacking into his personal systems and manipulating his security protocols to make it appear as though an accident had occurred. It wasn't an accident. It was just another step in an elaborate dance. Each strike was calculated and cold. Thrax never broke a sweat. He never faltered. The Zeller were born to kill, and this was his gift. But there was something different in the air now, something the assassin hadn't expected. The deaths were starting to draw attention. Humanity had not been entirely unaware of its vulnerability. The world governments quickly put their forces on high alert, scrambling to understand the attacks. There were murmurs of a serial killer, whispers of a rogue organization, but no one knew for certain who or what was behind the killings. The assassins, who moved in the shadows, had been prepared for this chaos. Yet, none of them had expected this level of resilience from the humans. A week passed. The assassins, undeterred, began to execute their missions with even more efficiency. They had learned the patterns of the planet's defenses, how Earth's leaders reacted, where their weaknesses lay, and how to strike with devastating impact. The Empire had ordered Thrax and his colleagues to take down high-ranking officials, military strategists, and key influencers within the scientific community. The plan was to cut off the heads of Earth's organized resistance, leaving the world confused and vulnerable to the will of the Galactic Empire. But something was happening. The world was reacting faster than expected. At first, it had been small things. Rumors of strange, unexplainable occurrences in the cities where the assassins had struck. Shadows that moved of their own accord. Eerie whispers carried on the wind. Strange figures appearing on security footage and then vanishing without a trace. It was subtle at first, something easily dismissed by most. But those who took the rumors seriously started noticing the pattern. People began to talk about the boogeyman. The term was thrown around in hushed tones, an urban legend taking root in the collective subconscious of a terrified populace. It was nothing more than a myth, a vague reference to an unstoppable force that would hunt down anyone who threatened humanity. But it was enough to stir the imagination, enough to start planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the assassins. Thrax dismissed it at first. He wasn't one to believe in superstitions, especially those concocted by frightened humans. But when the fourth assassin, Kor, a Zeller infiltrator known for his ruthlessness, was found dead in the streets of New York City, his throat torn out in a manner that made no logical sense, Thrax couldn't help but pause. Kor had been an expert in stealth, one of the Empire's best, and yet someone, or something, had taken him down with brutal efficiency. The next day, it was the turn of another assassin. Jaren, a tall and intimidating Yurton, known for his imposing strength, was sent to eliminate a prominent diplomat in London. He never returned. No one could find him. All that remained was a trail of blood leading into the darkened alleys of the city, but no body. Whispers began to grow louder. The boogeyman wasn't just a myth. It was something real, something that hunted the assassins one by one. Thrax, now beginning to sense that his mission was being compromised, met with the remaining assassins in a hidden command center deep within a mountain range. There was tension in the air, an unease that none of them had ever experienced before. The Zeller were meant to be the apex predators of the galaxy, never questioned, never defeated. And yet, something had changed. They were not the hunters anymore. "We are being hunted," Thrax said, his voice low and deliberate. "This planet, these humans, they found a way to fight back." One of the Yurton assassins, Zell, scoffed. "It's just paranoia. They're weak. We are the ones who strike fear into the galaxy." Thrax glared at him. "Do not underestimate them." Zell's arrogance was a dangerous thing, but Thrax had no time to correct it. The situation was spiraling out of control. The assassins who had once moved with certainty were now second-guessing every step, every move. Earth's response to the Empire's killing spree was growing more coordinated by the day, and that was what scared Thrax the most. Humans had adapted quickly, far more quickly than any of them had anticipated. Thrax was about to give orders for the next wave of assassinations when the ground shook beneath their feet. The base's sensors flashed red. Someone was approaching. The air crackled with an unseen tension. For the first time in his long career as an assassin, Thrax felt the faintest stirrings of fear. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew that whatever had begun on Earth had only just begun to unfold. And the boogeyman was not just a myth anymore. It was a reality. Humanity had always been resilient, but it was a resilience born of necessity, not of choice. They had adapted to the brutality of the universe in ways the assassins could not understand. They did not fear death the same way the Zeller did. Where others saw weakness, they saw strength. Where others saw vulnerability, they saw an opportunity. And it was that very quality that had driven humanity to create something more terrifying than any of the invaders could have imagined: the boogeyman. It had been developed in secret, an answer to threats too immense for ordinary methods of defense. The boogeyman was not a soldier or a weapon. It was a force of nature, an amalgamation of human ingenuity, fear, and cruelty. Born from a dark corner of Earth's classified military projects, it was a weapon meant to remain dormant until called upon in humanity's greatest hour of need. The assassins, with all their calculated skill, had underestimated what they were facing. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the biochemist whom Thrax had killed, had once been a pivotal part of the project. Her death had, unknowingly to her killers, unleashed the final catalyst for the boogeyman's activation. It wasn't a weapon that could be easily controlled. It had been designed to adapt, to evolve, to become what was needed in any given situation. And now, the boogeyman had been awakened, not as a machine or a soldier, but as an entity, a living nightmare built to hunt and destroy without mercy. It began with a series of whispers. Then, as the assassin's operations continued to falter, the world's media began to report odd occurrences. Security footage from various cities showed glimpses of strange figures. People who appeared where they shouldn't, who moved too quickly, too silently, slipping in and out of shadows without a trace. The assassins, always alert, had seen these reports and dismissed them. They believed it was just paranoia, the work of scared civilians. But deep down, even they knew that something was off. The way the humans were reacting to the killings, the way they started to talk about something, or someone following them, it unsettled them. Thrax was the first to notice it. He had been dispatched to New York City to deal with a new target, a high-ranking government official with ties to the military. But as he walked the rain-soaked streets, a nagging feeling crept into his mind. Something wasn't right. He had studied Earth cities for months, tracking the flow of traffic, the patterns of daily life. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The people moved with an odd hesitance, their eyes darting nervously, their whispers carried on the wind. It wasn't paranoia. It was fear. He stopped in the middle of the street, his senses sharpening. He wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette just beyond the edge of his vision. It was human, but it didn't belong. Thrax instinctively reached for his weapon, but before he could react, the figure was gone, as if it had never been there. His heart raced. The figure hadn't made a sound. There had been no sign of its approach, no warning. It was as if it had melted into the darkness itself. Thrax narrowed his eyes, scanning the surroundings. Something was wrong. And then, the first thought that sent a shiver down his spine, the boogeyman. It was no longer a myth. It was here, back at the assassin's hidden base. The remaining operatives had already begun to feel the shift in the air. Zell, the arrogant Yurton, was the next to meet the boogeyman. He had been assigned to track down an influential journalist in Paris, but he never returned. His colleagues, desperate to make sense of his disappearance, combed through the city for days, but there was no sign of him. No body, no clues. Only the same eerie silence that had come to mark the assassin's every failure. Thrax, now back at the base, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. And he knew that the boogeyman was the one doing the hunting. It wasn't long before the remaining assassins began to disappear one by one. Jaren, the hulking Yurton who had once been one of the most feared warriors in the Empire, was found dead in the ruins of a once thriving city. His body was mangled, torn apart as though by a force far beyond anything a human, or even a Yurton, could withstand. The same patterns appeared again and again. A single figure moving too quickly for the human eye to follow, a chilling sense of dread before death arrived, and then silence. The Empire's plan to dismantle Earth's leadership, to strike down the key players, was unraveling. The remaining assassins were no longer hunting their targets. They were the hunted. And the boogeyman was closing in. For the first time, Thrax allowed himself to consider the possibility that they were outmatched. The humans, with all their apparent weakness, had created something far more deadly than the Empire had ever anticipated. The boogeyman was not just a weapon. It was something else entirely, something born from the human desire to protect themselves, something that had been unleashed to protect them from the very predators now stalking their world. Thrax knew he had to stop it. He couldn't allow the boogeyman to disrupt the Empire's plans. But as he tried to organize a counterattack, he was struck by the grim realization that no weapon could defeat what was already here. The boogeyman wasn't just following orders. It was following a primal instinct, one that had been honed by humanity's collective fear and will to survive. And now, that primal instinct was hunting them all. The assassins had underestimated the depth of human ingenuity, their capacity for innovation born from desperation. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back when cornered. The boogeyman was the culmination of that fight, a living, breathing nightmare that had no equal in the galaxy. As the night stretched on and the shadows grew deeper, Thrax finally understood what it meant to be prey. The base was eerily quiet, the oppressive silence thickened by a growing sense of dread. Thrax paced back and forth, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the carnage around him. His comrades, once formidable and unshakable, were now either dead or missing. The last few assassins had been picked off one by one, their fate sealed by an invisible force that had begun to feel less like a myth and more like a relentless inevitability. He had no plan, no clear way to fight back, only the cold realization that they were out of their depth. The boogeyman wasn't just hunting them. It was hunting with purpose, with intelligence, and most importantly, it was hunting them as if it had been trained for this very moment. Thrax knew he had made a grave mistake underestimating humanity. The boogeyman was not a mere legend. It was an evolution of their most primal survival instincts, crafted in the darkest recesses of their society's fears. There was no weapon in the universe that could match it now. The humans had done what no other species could. They had turned fear into a weapon so powerful that even the Empire's finest were vulnerable. And now it was personal. The last remaining assassin was Zell, the Yurton who had always dismissed the boogeyman as nothing more than the stuff of children's stories. Zell had been sure of his strength, sure of his ability to hunt down and eliminate anything that stood in his way. But now, he too was afraid, his massive form shifting nervously as he stood next to Thrax in their darkened command center. "We need a strategy," Zell muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Strategy?" Thrax's voice was low, laced with frustration. "We've had a strategy. We've followed orders. We've executed every mission to perfection. But this—" He paused, running a hand through his hair, his thoughts jumbled. "This isn't a mission. This is a slaughter." The reality of the situation hit him all at once. They weren't just being hunted. They were being eradicated. The boogeyman was systematically picking them off with terrifying precision, erasing the remnants of the Empire's presence on Earth. And for the first time in his life, Thrax felt completely helpless. As the two remaining assassins debated their options, the lights flickered. A sudden chill swept through the base, freezing the air, and the hairs on the back of Thrax's neck stood on end. He turned, eyes scanning the shadows. He didn't have to see it to know it was here. A sound like a whisper cut through the silence, then the unmistakable thud of footsteps. But there was something wrong with the rhythm of them, too quick, too deliberate, as if the steps were being made by someone who was not quite human. Zell tensed, reaching for his weapon, but Thrax stopped him with a raised hand. "No weapons," Thrax whispered. "We don't stand a chance if we try to fight." The darkness in the corner of the room seemed to shift, as if the very shadows had come alive. And then, without warning, the boogeyman emerged from the blackness, its form almost indistinct in the low light, yet somehow present in every corner of the room. It was humanoid in shape, but it moved with an unnatural fluidity, its features hidden beneath a cloak of darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. There was no face, no discernible expression, just the hollow emptiness of the void. For a moment, neither Thrax nor Zell could move. The creature before them was not like any opponent they had ever faced. It wasn't a soldier or a warrior. It wasn't even a force. They couldn't define it as anything tangible. It was just there, a manifestation of humanity's deepest, most primal fear. Zell was the first to act. He lunged forward, a roar ripping from his chest, but the boogeyman was faster. In an instant, it was upon him, its movements so swift that Thrax barely had time to register them. The creature's hand shot out, and before Zell could even react, it wrapped around his throat with impossible strength. Thrax's eyes widened as the Yurton assassin struggled in the grip of the shadowy figure, his massive frame writhing in panic. But the boogeyman showed no mercy. In one smooth motion, it twisted Zell's neck, snapping it with a sickening crack. The lifeless body crumpled to the ground with a dull thud, and the room fell silent once more. Thrax's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Zell, the unstoppable force, had been reduced to nothing more than a broken husk in the blink of an eye. He swallowed hard, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. There was no fighting this. There was no winning. The boogeyman was not a foe to be defeated. It was an inevitability that nothing could stop. It turned its attention to Thrax, its presence suffocating, its form shifting with an eerie fluidity. Thrax felt his knees weaken beneath him, his instincts screaming at him to run, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows closed in, and he realized with a cold clarity that his fate had already been sealed. He was the last of the assassins, and there was no escape. But then, something unexpected happened. As the boogeyman drew closer, a sudden pulse of energy surged through Thrax. It wasn't from his body, it was from the very core of the planet itself. He could feel it in the air, a hum that seemed to resonate with every molecule of his being. It was fear, yes, but it was more than that. It was a deep, primal response to a threat that had existed since the dawn of time, an instinct that told him to survive, to fight. For a moment, he thought he heard a voice, a whisper so faint it might have been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was a memory of the humans he had watched, the scientists, the soldiers, all of them fighting with an impossible will to live. And then it hit him. The boogeyman wasn't just a weapon. It was humanity's will to survive. It was the culmination of everything they had been, everything they had fought for. It had become the very essence of their resistance. Thrax, in that fleeting moment, understood he wasn't meant to defeat it. He was meant to be consumed by it. The boogeyman lunged forward, and Thrax, without thinking, stepped into the darkness, ready to face his fate. The shadows swallowed him whole. The darkness consumed Thrax, enveloping him in a void so complete that he felt as though the very fabric of existence had been torn away. There was no sound, no light, just the oppressive weight of the boogeyman pressing in on him from all sides. It was as though the creature had merged with the shadows themselves, its form no longer a separate entity, but a part of the very space around him. Thrax felt his breath quicken, the familiar cold dread rising in his chest. He had faced countless enemies in his lifetime, but none had ever made him feel so utterly insignificant. Then, the whisper came again, so faint that he wasn't sure if it was real or just his mind playing tricks on him. The voice was human, a strange, distant echo that seemed to resonate with the core of his being. It was familiar, but not. A fleeting memory of those who had fought, those who had resisted the Empire's iron grip. They had all been crushed underfoot, but their spirit had not died. You are not alone. The words stirred something deep inside him. His instincts flared to life, and he fought against the suffocating void, against the sensation that his very being was being erased. He had survived countless battles before. He would survive this one too. Suddenly, a bright flash of light cut through the darkness, and Thrax found himself standing in an empty, barren landscape. The world around him was twisted, fractured, nothing more than broken pieces of reality held together by thin threads of memory. The boogeyman was there, its form looming, its presence an overwhelming force that seemed to crush the very air out of his lungs. But something had shifted. It was no longer a mere predator. It was something else, something more tangible. Its shadows were thinner now, weaker. Thrax took a step forward, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his weapon. But he knew it was useless. He could feel the futility of it in his bones. He wasn't meant to fight the boogeyman in the traditional sense. This wasn't a battle of strength or skill. This was a battle for survival, for the very essence of what it meant to be human. The boogeyman tilted its head, its empty face staring at him as though it could see straight through to his soul. There was no malice in its gaze, no hatred, just an unyielding force of nature, relentless and cold. "You are nothing," it whispered, its voice a hollow echo in the vast emptiness. Just another casualty in the endless war. Thrax's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of its words threatened to crush him. The boogeyman was right in a way. The assassins had been nothing more than pawns, sent to Earth by an empire that sought to dominate, to control. But humanity, humans had something the Empire could never understand. They had something no assassin, no weapon could ever fully account for. A will to survive, a drive to fight no matter the odds. And that, in the end, was what would defeat the boogeyman. Thrax's thoughts flashed to the assassins he had lost. To Zell. To Jaren. To all those who had been struck down without a chance. They had fought bravely, but they had been fighting the wrong battle. The true strength of humanity wasn't in weapons or power or control. It was in their refusal to give up, even in the face of death. The ground beneath Thrax's feet trembled, and the boogeyman lunged, its form blurring with terrifying speed. But this time, Thrax didn't move to avoid it. He stood firm, letting the creature close the distance. As the boogeyman reached out, its hand coming for his throat, Thrax did the only thing he could do. He closed his eyes and let the instinct of survival take over. The darkness surged toward him, swallowing him whole once more. But this time, he welcomed it. This time, he understood. And then, there was nothing. The silence that followed was profound. The world, once fractured and broken, began to settle. Thrax's body felt weightless, as though he was floating in some strange limbo between life and death. For a moment, he thought he was dead. But then, slowly, he became aware of the sounds around him. Soft whispers, the hum of machinery, the steady beat of a heart. His eyes fluttered open. The scene before him was no longer the twisted landscape of before. Instead, he found himself standing in the heart of a city, alive, bustling, and brimming with the energy of a world that had endured. He was back on Earth, but everything had changed. The boogeyman, the shadow that had haunted them all, was gone. There was no trace of it left, as though it had never existed at all. And then, Thrax understood. The boogeyman hadn't been defeated by strength, by weapons, or by force. It had been defeated by the will of humanity itself. The boogeyman was a reflection of their fear, their desperation, and it was through their own refusal to give in that they had erased it from existence. It had never been an unstoppable force. It had been an echo of human resilience, and once that resilience had been understood, once it had been recognized, the boogeyman could no longer survive. Thrax took a deep breath, the weight of everything he had experienced crashing down on him. He had been wrong. He had been blind. The Empire, with all its might, had underestimated humanity at every turn. They had underestimated the strength of a species that, despite its flaws, could always find a way to survive, to adapt, and to fight back. He looked around, the streets now filled with people who had no idea of the horrors that had unfolded in the shadows. They were moving forward, living their lives, unaware that they had been on the brink of destruction. And yet, they had won. They had emerged from the darkness stronger than ever. Thrax knew that the Empire would never truly understand this. They would never grasp the depths of what had just happened. But in that moment, standing amidst the hum of a city that had survived the impossible, Thrax understood one thing completely. The boogeyman had been vanquished, not by power, but by the very thing the Empire had feared most, humanity's unbreakable will to live. And with that, Thrax faded into the shadows, his part in the story complete. The boogeyman was gone, and the world had moved on. But humanity's fight would never end.